This is a 45-minute session on Foresight Insights. We have three speakers, Professor Meimei, Professor Seongwon, and Marissa. Our connection really is islands. I met Professor Song 20 years ago in Taiwan, Seongwon 24 years ago in Honolulu, and Marissa is from Fiji, native islander. So our focus really here is in their experience of doing future studies, futures thinking, and now the latest weird buzzword, foresight. What have they learned, and what can we learn from them? So I'm going to start off first with Meimei. And so we're going to start with the assumption that talking about the future out there is an epistemological mistake. That we're always in the future unless we show our own story within the world we're attempting to foresee, we're making the world worse. By beginning with ourselves, there's a chance, though not necessarily a foregone conclusion, that we can make a powerful difference. Meimei, anything you want about yourself?
Okay. I'm Meimei. I've been working in futures since 2004 or 5. For 16 years, I had taught futures full-time to undergraduate and graduate students. And I also facilitate futures to people from the industry, from the government, and NGOs, and so on. The year 2020 was very special to me because that was, of course, the year COVID hits. But at my personal level, I tried to take futures in Taiwan to a different level. I tried to create a different system so that it could be more accessible, more universal, and more easy to civil society as a whole. That was the plan. And then 4 months down the line, I had a stroke. So you can see this here. I was 53 years old back then. So today, maybe I'll share some of the insights I have, some of the ideas that future actually helped me in a way in my road to recovery.
I think let's ask one more there before we go to Seongwon.
Oh.
So as a narrative, how did futures help you? Because most people don't associate foresight and strokes.
True.
So in which way did it enable you, empower you?
A lot of people thought the value of futures or foresights is in planning the future. But actually, to me, before my stroke, I knew that the real value lies in your inner self. It helps you see the different levels of yourself, and you can decide what to do with them next. But what I didn't know was getting a stroke actually gave me a chance to see that even further, because all of a sudden I was beamed to the future. Yeah. I was actually 20 or 30 years older than I actually was. Okay, I was weak. I was not able to walk. I was not able to do any single thing, literally, without people's help. So actually, that was how I saw a different side of myself.
Thank you, Meimei. So it's really about vulnerability in the future.
Yes.
I think the point scholars make is everyone in this room will become disabled, if you're lucky. As part of aging, we've not designed systems to support our various disabilities. Yes. Professor Song.
Okay.
Your narrative, what do you do?
Yeah, please, of course. 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. I came from South Korea. I think Sohail, you crazy about K-pop. So have you ever heard about this song? 아파트, 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 아파트.
This is a surprise. We hadn't planned a K-pop rehearsal, but if you're going to go there, we're ready.
I'm honored to be here. Actually, my journey into future studies began not as a futurist, but as a journalist. In 2006, I had a chance to interview Professor Jim Dater, University of Hawaii, a very renowned futurist. During the interview, one of his statements deeply resonated with me. He said that the future is not singular. It is a plural. Until that moment, I had believed that the future was a single and inevitable, something clear but daunting. So I felt like a destination that I had to prepare for, and filled with anxiety about whether I could thrive or even survive. In South Korea, the narrative around the future often revolves bloody competition, a relentless drive to outperform others and emerge victorious at any cost. It's a very rigid and narrow vision of what lies ahead. So the idea is that there is many futures, not single, was a revelation to me. So I gradually came to understand the future is not a predetermined trajectory, but dynamic interplay of possibilities shaped by choices and actions and context. It is neither fixed nor fully open, just malleable, something malleable, and contingent on how we engage with it.
So let me ask you, given you and Jim did work 20 years ago on the Dream Society, the notion that non-material objects, even spiritual objects, will transform the world, we've clearly now entered a dream society as well as given disinformation, misinformation. We've entered the nightmare society. I think most of our planet has entered a nightmare. How would you phrase it in terms of the early work you did on gross national cool, drama as exports, etc.? Can you give us some insights there? Your work as a futurist in terms of creating the dream society.
Yeah, so in 2006, 7, I think, Dream Society published in some European nation, and Jim utilized the concept of Dream Society. And the Jim said to me that South Korea is the first nation to bring about the Dream Society because South Korea government support animation, pop, and drama, something like that. So I think that's why Korea built kind of Dream Society, nowadays K-pop and K-drama, and even Hangang, who had a first Nobel Prize in literature. So I'm very proud of that initiative in South Korea.
So the strategy 20 years ago, this vision of new measures instead of GDP, leads to the Nobel Prize in a way, and leads to huge new exports, if I understood you correctly. We'll go back to your work in the parliament. Marissa, can you tell us something about you and your work in futures in Fiji?
So my interest and very recent journey in Foresight actually was inspired by a collective research exercise I was doing in a remote island community in Fiji a couple of years ago. And this is a research around how local remote maritime communities were adapting to climate change impacts. And this particular community that I had gone to work with were facing the immediate impacts of sea level rise.
Okay.
And of course, I had never before seen this level of self-reliance and resilience. There were two solutions that this community had developed all on their own to try and combat climate change impacts. And these two really stood out to me. The first was they were using old refrigerators, filling them with heavy rocks and lining them up as makeshift seawalls. And they were doing this by training their children to dive for these rocks and collect them from the seabed and then weigh down these refrigerators as their makeshift seawall. And this was actually becoming a daily activity for the children because, of course, with the waves, it would wash away every day. Every day they would have to reinforce the seawall. That was one. The second was, of course, since it was a remote island community, they didn't have access to any waste collection services. So what they were doing was collecting their own waste, compacting this, and using this compacted waste to reclaim land, build up and reclaim land that was being lost to sea level rise. And of course, they were well aware of the negative impacts of that, the waste, toxins, and microplastic washing back into the ocean. But when you're in that state of survival mode, you have to come up with solutions that help you get through day by day. It's almost impossible to think about long-term solutions. And that's what really got me thinking is, how can we use Foresight to help Pacific Island countries come up with solutions or empower and build capacity of local communities to develop solutions that really are locally led, inclusive, and truly sustainable.
And yourself as an islander there, how did you experience then the day-to-day pressure and then suddenly, because I don't think the word foresight would make sense in Fijian, right? Would
No,
there be
not
what's
at
the
all.
local term you would use
Well,
in terms
the
of
thing
indigenous
is,
knowledge?
Pacific Islands have a different sense of what time is, so you
Yeah.
don't really think of the future in terms of foresight. In the Pacific, time is not linear. It's like a cycle, and you don't measure time through linear events. You measure time through moments and opportunities. So even introducing practices like foresight, you have to take a completely different approach. You have to consider the cultural context. So a lot of times you have to go back to learning from ancestors.
Yes.
So if your ancestors did this, how would you do this going into the future, thinking of the next generation?
Okay, so it's ancestors and future generations
Yes.
as opposed to foresight itself.
Yes.
Maybe do you want to jump on that? Meimei actually worked at Tamkang University, which, if you know, already 140,000 students have graduated in future studies. So it is the largest program in the world. But its weakness, as Meimei suggested, it wasn't in civil society. So your work was how to take it from the ivory tower, endless graduates, and embed it throughout Taiwanese society. So do you want to talk more about that, in terms of what worked and what hasn't worked?
What worked was, it was quite widespread. Every single graduate had to take a class in futures, so they get exposure, some fundamental, some ideas. On the other hand, what doesn't work is that these young people, even graduate students, they graduate and then they go to the workplace, and the boss, the employers don't necessarily have foresight, insight. So the boss won't let them do it, and they are too junior, so that they couldn't do anything about it. And in the end, some years down the line, they kind of lost it in a way. So I got impatient. I
Yes.
was like, we gotta go from the top. We gotta go from the people that can make these decisions instead of just from the bottom.
Fantastic. And then, so what did you do?
Because at first, it was interesting because in the beginning, I never did Foresight's work in Taiwan. My friend in Taiwan always asked me, how come you are always going abroad to do whatever work that you're doing? And I said, well, that's easy because no one in Taiwan has invited me to do anything. And then after a few years, I realized that, they didn't invite me because they didn't know it existed. So in the end, I realized that I had to be the saleswoman and start telling people how this works. So I did that. And then some people got the ideas, and finally, I decided that when I quit my job at Tamkang, I decided to reverse my role in a way so that I can go full-time doing futures spreading in a way, and then on the other hand, not just teaching all the time. Do you mind if I say something?
Jump in.
Right now, I feel I don't feel uncomfortable, but I want to apologize for my speech because it was damaged in a way in the stroke. So I feel that if you know that, then you would understand why is she talking like this. Okay, that's it. I got it out. Thank you.
I actually can't tell the pre-post Meimei. So what would you say? So you went from futures professor and then to future salesperson.
Yes.
And so what would you say the difficulty in that transition?
Wow. The difficulty is...
This wasn't pre-scheduled, by the way.
No,
I just said,
yeah, you're
show
right.
up and we're going to work it out.
The difficulty is that I was not used to being a sales. I'm not a good salesperson. In academia, they don't have to sell anything. If you like it, you like it. If you invite me, I'll go, and that's it. So I had to reverse the role, and in a way, so that I had to learn to be a sales. And that was a big thing for me. And the other thing that I learned actually is that I had to think from the other person's perspective.
Got it.
Instead of just what is correct and what can be done.
It's brilliant. So how wonderful is futures versus what you need?
Yes.
Seongwon, how about your transition again from academic and then you started to work with the Korean Parliament?
After completing my PhD, when I returned to South Korea, I felt a deep urgency to emphasize this perspective. Futures depends on our actions and choices. So I emphasized the importance of public participation in envisioning futures. So, I mean, without citizen engagement, future studies can devolve into a kind of abstract exercise and detached from practical realities and collective aspirations. So to facilitate this, I utilize Hawaii manuas for images of the future. So there are continued economic growth and collapse and conservative society and finally transformational society. So I convene the people across the nation representing in mini public that included different gender, regions, and ages and social classes. We get together, we explore two critical questions. What kind of future might we face if current systems continue? And the other question is, what kind of future do we prefer to create for future generations? So people had to choose for one of them among fours. The outcomes were astonishing because the majority of participants identified collapse as their preferred future.
Collapse as their preferred? So this is parliamentarians?
Yeah, prefer.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's not a desire for chaos, but yearning for a new beginning. What they're really want to saying is that you know, if we keep holding on to a current system, we can manage, and things will be getting worse. So, for example, you know, social polarization will deepen, especially young people already overwhelmed by the you know, bloody competition, delay marriage, and only focus on their personal survival. And drift away from the values like families and community solidarity. On top of that, they are warning us about even bigger we are running out of time to adapt to climate crisis. So if we don't make bold changes now, we will miss the chance.
So when just stopping you there, I'm a bit confused. So when I work with parliamentarians and we do futures work, they always pull me by the side and say, don't worry, we'll do all this, but let's be honest, we don't care. The head of European Parliament said, we know what the right thing to do is, but on every issue, we will never do the right thing because we can never get reelected on the right thing. So that's what I'm grown up with. And you're telling me the Korean parliamentarians actually care. So explain to me how is that possible?
I have a long story to explain about this. Before I joined the Parliament of Korea, this happened when I was in Science Technology Policy Institute.
Steppy, yeah?
Yeah, in Steppy. So let me elaborate more about my personal experience.
Thank you.
So I think maybe in 2015, 3 years into this project, the finding had caught the attention of major media outlets.
Okay.
And the media reframed it pivotal moment in national discussion about the future. The public discussion revealed growing curiosity about alternatives to the status quo and kind of newfound openness to explore diverse futures and visions.
So the parliament went to the public and that created excitement around the future.
So I think it is one of the most memorable and meaningful moment. So I think it is a very clear instance of how foresight can surface profound insights and even broader social implications when combined with public participation. So,
before we go to Marissa, let me jump in there and ask you again. So Korean culture, as you defined it, is push, 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 right? Work hard, work hard, work hard. Does strategic foresight transform that, or is that one more checklist, one more thing I need to do at midnight to graduate? Someone can, that's for you to reflect on. You were describing Korean culture as always pushing, right? To be the global leader. Does strategic foresight make that worse or better? Is it one more thing you have to do for every student? Is it a pressure or can it be transformative? Think about that. Let's go to Marissa. We'll get back to you. You have your chance to reflect. Remember, there was no pre-planned questions here. So Marissa, again, same thing. What's worked, what's not worked?
Well, for UNDP Pacific, one of the most recent foresight work that we're taking part in is we're developing a Pacific Futures Report.
Okay.
And part of this, of course, requires consultative processes.
Maybe closer to the mic. Super. Thank
So part of this, we also have consultative processes. And so something that we've discovered that really works in the Pacific context is becoming really innovative with how we can locally contextualize participatory foresight workshops. And so we've done this with our youth consultations, and we found this works because oftentimes things can get very dystopian quickly when we ask youth about futures, given the current lived realities, given the impacts of climate change. And so what we did was we helped them think about the future by getting them to speak in proverbs or use metaphors, because this is very natural to Pacific Islanders. We speak in metaphors because a lot of times we live in a very complex setting, and when you speak in metaphors, it can speak to many people. A lot more people can relate to it because you're saying a lot of things by saying one thing. And so we're using different metaphors that are familiar to them. For example, the ocean. How would you use the ocean to describe what the future would look like in 2050 or something like that? We also use this when we're doing workshops with Pacific Island artists who are designing artifacts of the future for our Pacific Futures Report, which, side note, some of these artworks will be featured in our Indigenous workshop
So
on Thursday.
can you give us some examples of some of these metaphors about the future?
So we use things that they are familiar with, like oceans, marine animals, kokonda, which is a Fijian dish made of cured fish and a few other mixed items. So some of them use kokonda to describe how life is made up of all different ingredients, complex, but when they come together, it's a beautiful thing. So that's some of the ways they were
It's the
describing
image of the future Pacific.
Yes.
Bring it together to create something novel.
Diversity that brings, yeah.
Okay. And for you, when you're working, what methods do you use when you're doing foresight in your local communities? And you said metaphor, anything else? In terms of
That's,
eliciting response?
One common one in the Pacific is what we call talanoa, which is, I'm not sure if you're familiar because you also lived in Hawaii for a little bit, and this is a Pacific process of inclusive dialogues.
Yes.
And this is a method that we used with our elders in their consultation processes because something that comes very naturally to Pacific Islanders is teaching through storytelling.
Yes.
And these are passing down indigenous knowledge and traditional practices through generations. So what you learn from your ancestors through storytelling, you will then pass on to the younger generation as well. And what we learned during this consultative process was that a lot of Pacific Islanders or a lot of Pacific Island countries, when it comes to passing on indigenous traditional knowledge, you can only actually, a lot of times you can choose one person only. So it's not something you would just share with anyone. You pick someone in your family, it might not even be your child, and then you have a responsibility because you're not passing on your knowledge, you're passing on knowledge from your ancestor. So you have to be very mindful of who you're passing that knowledge on to.
So ancestors are critical in all foresight work. That's my main takeaway. You can't just go forward without remembering the past.
Exactly.
Seongwon, what would be, before we go to Meimei again, so what would be the core in terms of metaphor work that you've seen in Korea, South Korea?
A metaphor for a new vision.
Yeah, metaphor either in the parliament or outside.
Usually about the futures.
Yeah.
That's why I already earlier said that it is one clear predetermined path.
Yes.
But nowadays, Koreans came to understand there are many futures, and then they can, create the futures.
So how would you say that in Korean in terms of the core language?
Core language in Korean?
Yeah. I mean, there's must be many Korean speakers here.
미래는 열려 있다.
Wow.
So the reason why I pushed
Go ahead.
Seongwon there because, again, foresight is not out there. It's always embodied in our body. And so when you go through story, the body in itself goes through a transformation. So if you saw how Seongwon changed, right? Immediately there was power and focus as opposed to having to English the future, which I know you don't like doing. So what happens then in parliamentary exercises? How does that play itself out?
Yeah, so in a STEPI, identifying a preferred future, fresh start, was a kind of essential milestone in future studies. But the real challenges lies in translating its vision into policy-oriented language. Yeah. So the journey towards the new vision, proved to be very slow and complex. But I recognize that Parliament holds a kind of significant decision-making power. So I was fortunate to join the newly established Futures Institute within Parliament in 2018. So my role was to challenge the word, growth.
Yeah.
So I ask a critical question about the growth. Why must the word growth always be preceded by economic or national? So I suggest alternatives, inclusive growth, social growth, environmental growth, even personal growth. And also suggest alternative vision, which is a mature society. Mature society is designed to contrast with the growth-obsessed society, which measures success only in GDP, while ignoring social and environmental cost. But mature society sounds like turning gray hair. So
Or no hair. Next step after gray hair.
right.
Stages.
Yeah. So in English, I use alternative words, regenerative society,
Fantastic.
which prioritize personal growth over national growth, or prioritize social values and environmental values over economic values. It prioritizes equity over
So how do parliamentarians respond then?
pronounce
How do they respond to you?
yeah. Let me pace my pace. So we shared this vision with the presidential candidates in national election, and facilitate discussions with the lawmakers from both ruling party and opposition parties. But the result was underwhelmed. Because the regenerative society was not reflected in any policy platforms. So I was very disappointed.
Yeah.
I was very disappointed. But this experience reinforced the critical role of civil society in transforming, in advancing transformational society.
So this leads to the next question, I think. Let's go to Meimei there. I mean, I remember 20 years ago asking Taiwanese students how they saw the future. And they said, we're on a tightrope, the Chinese dragon here and an American shark there. And we can't see any future because we're caught between these two worlds. Has that changed, or how would you see, question one, the metaphors today, and question two, start to think about, we looked at successes all three of you had, how do you deal with disappointment in the field? So let's start with the metaphor, and then maybe if you could go to challenging disappointment.
Okay. As in Taiwan, the metaphor actually changed a lot because the success story that Taiwanese businessmen have in China actually prohibit them from imagining a new, different future. So in the beginning, about 10 years ago, when I approached the industry, they were like, oh, we don't need to think about the future. All you need to do is go to China and earn money. And we have lots of money, and it's endless money coming in, so no need to worry about the future. But since about 6 or 8 years ago, they stopped, China stopped using Taiwanese companies for that. So they were forced now to think about, what do we do? So the entire society actually in Taiwan start to shift. So they are more willing to think about the future in a more genuine way now. So that's the one thing. Yeah. But about the future, about the student that you were talking about, the young generations, the younger generations actually changed too. Earlier in the session, they were talking about how young people actually see the future very different from the older so-called in their 30s or 40s, that kind of vision. So actually, that changed too. So I don't know if that's
thank you.
that's good. Yeah. So
And how do you then address disappointment? I mean, things have worked really well in your projects. You've succeeded. How do you personally deal with disappointment in a project or long term?
the biggest disappointment is that they would have profound learning in workshop, in the workshop and lessons. And then in the end, they get dragged back into the business as usual because they have to get busy. So that's the one push or the one weight prohibiting people, sorry about that, prohibiting people from really engage in a real long-term future.
So they go to the long term, and then there's the Monday morning question.
Yes, yes.
So what do you do to address that? Just skip Monday, go to Tuesday?
To me, before my stroke, my strategy was I actually found 3 companies who are willing to work with me in long term. It's like I don't want to work for you. I don't want to facilitate features for you unless you are willing to commit longer term in terms of 3 to 5 years to work on this project. And they say yes, and before I would go. So that's as far as I went
So
at the
you
time.
select companies in your ecology of foresight that are best fit.
Yes,
Brilliant.
because I couldn't do all those little things anymore.
Thank you. Marissa, so in your case, disappointment means extinction, right?
Well,
So climate change,
if
it's
you're
not like
going
an idea, it's
extreme,
much
yeah,
deeper. So
yes.
how do you address
That's why
those
a lot of
challenges?
times it can get dystopian very quickly. But actually, Pacific Islanders are some of the most agile and resilient people you'll meet. So dealing with failure isn't as hard because for a couple of reasons. One is that Pacific Islanders actually embrace uncertainty. Historically, Pacific Islanders have navigated thousands of miles of open ocean with no mechanical instruments, just from learning from signals that they're getting from nature. So navigating uncertainty isn't an issue for Pacific Islanders. The second thing is the concept around mutual contradiction, which sits very comfortably with Pacific Islanders. So they are always at any point ready to fail because they know it's a part of life, because it's a cycle. You will fail and then you will succeed, and you will have hard times and you will have better times. It's just about how you navigate these uncertainties and how you come back and recover from it.
So navigation then becomes a core narrative.
Yes, absolutely.
And so in your projects, that's what comes out there.
Yes, so this is something that we're really trying to embody in our projects, especially in the design phase, is how can we incorporate Pacific philosophies in development work that wouldn't usually take this kind of approach.
Thank you. Any last comments that you want to add, share with everyone? It's up to you. What would you like everyone to remember about Foresight Insight, your core insight you want to share with everyone?
Yeah.
Seongwon, please.
Yeah. So the political system struggled to adopt a new vision. I clearly observed that some citizens are already living out the values of a regenerative society. So I call this citizen as emerging citizen, who people who, while invisible under the traditional values, but become visible, through the lens of a new vision. So, I mean, truth is, citizens were already there.
Yeah.
It was not the civil society recognized the new vision and claimed to be, I'm emerging citizen. But instead that it is us as futurists who had failed to notice them. So this new vision opened our eyes to notice them. So I'm eagerly look for citizens who work with a new vision, and really this is kind of a memorable moment that I had, and also emphasized the importance of public engagement. I think, you know, futurism return to its roots. You know, Bertrand Duzuvenel or Robert Jung, you know, they organized programs like Future Salon and Future Dialogues and Future Workshop to explore possibilities with the citizen on the street. So I think we have to return to its roots.
What do you tell the parliamentarian? We ran a large Foresight exercise once, and we worked with the citizens and the mayor and the mayor's office in Seoul. We presented them with alternatives, and just about we're about to vote, the CEO runs to me and says, "I'm anxious." And I said, "Why?" She goes, "What if they vote for the wrong future?" I said, "That ship has sailed." We just told the mayor, and he agreed, he will fund any future that's selected by the citizens. And so, but I understood the mayor's tension. He just wanted to do this as a ploy to get engagement, but he still wanted to put money where he wanted to put money. So how do you deal with that contradiction at the parliamentarian level?
No, I believe the power of citizens. You know,
So back to the people,
you know,
back to the power.
personally, they can be distorted or biased, but come together, maybe 20 people, they create a balanced view about the future. You know, so that's why I believed in every workshop with a citizen. I very enjoyed the time with the citizen. I learned a lot from them. Yeah.
It's very-
Their hope, our hope.
Thank you, Seongwon. Very powerful. Meimei, what would you say is last comment you want to share with everyone?
As futurists, we preach, so-called preach, in workshops and classes all the time that the future is unpredictable, and you have to be flexible and ready to adapt all the time. And then when the stroke hit, it really put me to the test that, okay, here's everything that's unpredictable, and what do you do next? And the funny thing is that it wasn't as bad as I thought. Oh, I shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
I don't want another shock. But everything, the end of yourself is after the collapse, like someone was saying earlier. After the end of yourself, after the collapse, you always have a new bud. You always have a new life emerges from that. And that's what I'm so-called teaching or reminding people in workshop all the time, that when you think about a dystopia, don't just throw in the pen and say, well, that's it. And the war comes and the aliens come, and or in Taiwan, the Chinese come and invite and invaded Taiwan, and so that's it. And people do that literally all the time. But then I would always ask, what's next?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And they would always like stare at me for like 10 seconds and then say, oh, there is a life, I should think about that. And to me, that was the case after the stroke come. So be flexible, and futures can help you in that way too.
It's brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we're going to end right on time. To summarize our perspectives, I think Meimei was going from the professor to the salesperson, and I think you've shown you're really good at it. And really, it's not about the end game. There's always rebirth. From Seongwon, it's really parliamentarian, the politics of the future. The answer is with the citizens, is democratization in a deep way. And I think from Marissa, what I learned was the ancestors are a critical resource in doing foresight work. Find the core metaphor, in your case, navigation, and use that as a way to transform the future. Thank you so much for your time, and let's thank our three speakers.